Okay. All right, I'm live. All right, people. Top of the day. Happy. Uh-oh. I got my charger plugged in. Trying to keep my phone still. Okay. That might not work. Okay. Hopefully it will. Okay. Happy Sunday, everybody. Happy Sunday. Betwabu. Y'all, let's get right to it. It is Sunday, December 27, 2020, day 35 of year 3 of reading through the books of the law and the prophets, and of the 3-year consecutive day count. We are on day 704. 704. Yes. Okay, y'all. So today we are reading Enoch 81 through 83. Then we're going to jump over into the Legends of the Jews. So let's go ahead and let's do this real quick. The Shema. I stuck it up there, y'all. I got to be careful because you know how sometimes you have something sitting in your face all the time and then you just kind of zone it out. I'm going to try not to do that. I got it up there and I wrote it on the top of my thing. Shema. So I don't forget. So let's do that real quick. Then we're going to get started. Move this right there. Okay. Hear therefore, O Israel, and observe to do it, that it may be well with thee, and that ye may increase mightily, as Yahuwah, the God of thy fathers, has promised thee, in the land that floweth with milk and honey. Hear, O Israel, Yahuwah, our God, he is one God, and thou shalt love Yahuwah thy God with all thy heart, with all thy soul, and with all thy might. And these words which I command thee this day shall be in thine heart, and thou shalt teach them diligently unto thy children, and shalt talk of them when thou sittest in thy house, and when thou walkest by the way, and when thou liest down, and when thou risest up. And thou shalt bind them for a sign upon thy hand, and they shall be as frontlets between thy eyes. And thou shalt write them on the doorposts of thy house and on thy gates. And Yahuwah, who commanded us to do all these statutes, to fear him for our good always, that he might preserve us alive as it is this day. And it shall be our righteousness if we observe to do these commandments before Yahuwah as he has commanded us. Shema, yes. No, it's Shema. You're close, Trina. Shema. Yep, so Shema. They call it the Shema, means listen. Hear, O Israel, pay attention and listen. That's what it means. The Shema. Okay, so let's go ahead and hop right on over here to Enoch chapter 81. As soon as I got off yesterday, I made a little note. I wrote Shema real big, and I got some tape and taped it right up here by my camera on my laptop, and I wrote it big in my notebook so I would not forget it. So I get in the groove of remembering it daily. I just got to make sure it's at the top so I don't forget to do it. Okay, y'all. So Enoch chapter 81. Boom, there we go. All right. Okay, y'all. Enoch chapter 81. He said, O Enoch, look on the cipher of the tablets of heaven, which have gradually dropped down, and reading that which is written in it, understand every part of it. Then I looked on all which was written, and understood all, reading the chapter and everything written in it, all works of man, and of all the children of flesh upon the earth, during the generations of the world. Immediately after I blessed Yahuwah, the King of glory, who has thus forever formed the whole workmanship of the world. And I glorified Yahuwah on the account of his long suffering and blessing towards the children of the world. At that time I said, blessed is the man who shall die righteous and good, against whom no catalogue of crime has been written, and with whom iniquity is not found. Then those 3 holy ones caused me to approach, and placed me on the earth before the door of my house. And they said unto me, explain everything to Methuselah your son, and inform all your children that no flesh shall be justified before Yahuwah, for he is their creator. During 1 year we shall leave you with your children, and you until you shall again recover your strength, that you may instruct your family. Write these things and explain them to all your children. But in another year they shall take you from the midst of them, and your heart shall be strengthened. For the elect shall point out righteousness to the elect. The righteous with the righteous shall rejoice, congratulating each other. But the sinners with sinners shall die, and the perverted with the perverted shall be drowned. Like those likewise who act righteously shall die on the account of the works of man, and shall be gathered together on the account of the works of the wicked. In those days they finished conversing with me, and I returned to my fellow men, blessing the Yahuwah of worlds. Shema. I did it, Dana. You must have missed it. Okay. Enoch chapter 82. I remembered I wrote myself a note. Peace and blessings, peace and blessings. Enoch chapter 82. Now, my son Methuselah, all these things I speak unto you and write for you. To you I have revealed all, and have given you the seraphim of everything. Preserve, my son Methuselah, the seraphim. Remember, seraphim or sefer is a scroll or a book or writing. Preserve, my son Methuselah, the seraphim written by your father, that you may reveal them to future generations. Wisdom have I given you to your children and your posterity, that they may reveal to their children for generations forever. This wisdom in their thoughts, and that those who comprehend may not slumber, but hear with their ears, that they may learn this wisdom and be deemed worthy of eating wholesome food. Blessed are all the righteous, blessed are all who walk in righteousness, in whom is no crime, as in sinners when all their days are numbered. With respect to the progress of the sun in heaven, it enters and goes out of gate. It enters and goes out of gate for 30 days with the leaders of the 1,000 classes of the stars, with 4 which are added and appertain to the 4 quarters of the year, which conduct them and accompany them at 4 periods. Respecting these, men greatly err, and do not calculate them in a calculation of every age, for they greatly they're greatly in error respecting to them. Nor do men know accurately that they are in the calculation of the year. But indeed, these are marked out forever, one in the first gate, one in the third, one in the fourth, and one in the sixth, so that the year is completed in 364 days. Truly has been stated and accurately has been calculated that which is marked down. For the luminaries, the months, the fixed periods, the years, and the days, Uriel has explained to me and communicated to me, whom Yahuwah of all creation, on my account, commanded according to the might of heaven and the power which it possesses both night and day, to explain light to man of the sun, the moon, and stars, and of all the powers of heaven, which are turned with their respective orbs. This is the ordinance of the stars, which set in their places, their seasons, in their periods, in their days, and in their months. These are the names of those who conduct them, who watch over and enter their seasons according to their ordinance in their periods, in their months, in their influence, and in their stations. 4 conductors of them first enter, who separate the 4 quarters of the year, or like the 4 seasons. After these, 12 conductors of their classes, who separate the months and the year, 364, with the leaders of 1,000, who distinguish between the days as well as between the 4 additional ones, which conductors divide the 4 quarters of the year. These leaders of 1,000 are in the midst of the conductors, and the conductors are added each behind his station, and their conductors make the separation. These are the names of the conductors who separate the 4 quarters of the year, who are appointed: Mechel, Hamelech, Miliel, and Narel. These are the names and the names of those who conduct them are Ardnael, Yausael, and Yelumiel. I think I screwed the names up. I'm quite sure I did. Moving on. These are the 3 who follow after the conductors of the classes, each following after the three conductors of the classes, which themselves follow after those conductors of the stations who divide the 4 quarters of the year. In the first part of the year rises and rules Micaiah, who is named Tammany and Zahai, the southern sun. All the days of his influence, which he rules, are 91 days. And these are the signs of the days which are seen upon the earth. In the days of his influence, perspiration, heat, and trouble. All the trees become fruitful. The leaf of every tree comes forth. The grain is reaped, and the rose and every species of flowers blossom in the field, and the trees of winter are dried up. These are the names of the conductors who are under them: Barkael, Zelzabel, and another additional conductor of 1,000 is named Heliolith. The days of those influence have been completed. The other conductor next after them is Himelech, whose name they call the splendid Zahai, sun. All the days of his light are 91 days. These are the sign of his days upon the earth: heat and drought. Okay, the first one, if you didn't get it, it was springtime. This, we're going into summertime now. So you can tell by what happens during their rule, while they're ruling. All the days of his light are 91 days. These are the signs of his days upon the earth: heat and drought, while the trees bring forth their fruits, warmed and concocted, and give their fruits to dry. The flocks follow, mate, and bear young. All the fruits of the earth are concocted with everything in the fields, and the vines are trodden. This takes place during the time of his influence. These are their names and orders, and the conductors who are under the sun of those who are the chiefs of 1,000: Gadiel, Kail, and Heel. And the name of the additional leader of 1,000 is Asaphel. The days of his influence have been completed. Enoch chapter 83. And now I have shown you, my son Methuselah, every sight which I saw prior to your birth. I will relate another vision which I saw before I was married. They resemble each other. The first was when I was learning a sefer, and the other before I was married to your mother. I saw a potent vision, and on account of these things besought Yahuwah. I was lying down in the house of my grandfather Malalel, and I saw in a vision heaven thrown down and removed. And when it fell upon the earth, I saw likewise the earth absorbed by a great abyss, and mountains suspended over mountains. Hills were sinking upon hills. Lofty trees were gliding off from their trunks and were in the act of being projected and of sinking into the abyss. At these things, the word fell down in my mouth. I cried out and said, "The earth is destroyed." Then my grandfather, Malalel, raised me up and said to me, "Why do you thus cry out, my son? And wherefore thus do you lament?" I related to him the whole vision which I had seen. He said to me, "Confirm is that which you have seen, my son, and potent the vision of your dream respecting every secret sin of the earth. Its substance shall sink into the abyss, and a great destruction take place. Now, my son, rise up and beseech Yahuwah of glory, for you are faithful, that a remnant may be left upon the earth, and that he will not wholly destroy it. My son, all this calamity upon the earth comes down from heaven. Upon earth shall there be a great destruction." Then I arose, prayed, and entreated, and wrote down my prayer for the generations of the world, explaining everything to my son Methuselah. When I went down below and looking up to heaven, I beheld the sun proceeding from the east, the moon descending to the west, a few stars, and everything which Yahuwah has known from the beginning. I blessed Yahuwah of judgment and magnified him, because he has sent forth the sun from the windows of the east, that ascending and rising in the face of heaven, it might spring up and pursue the path which has been pointed out to it. And that is our reading in the book of Enoch today. That was 81 through 83. So let's go ahead and hop right on over here to page 5, and we'll pick up where we left off yesterday. The Legends of the Jews. And if you have the smaller book, the topic is Abraham immigrates to Haran. Okay, y'all, so let's get started. I want to get through it before everybody start waking up, and we already got one up moving around. So, all right. For a period of 2 years, Abraham could devote himself undisturbed to his chosen task of turning the hearts of men to Yahuwah and his teachings. In his pious undertaking, he was aided by his wife Sarah, whom he had married in the meantime. While he exhorted the men and sought to convert them, Sarah addressed herself to the women. She was a helpmeet worthy of Abraham. Indeed, in prophetical powers, she ranked higher than her husband. She was sometimes called Iska, the seer, on that account. At the expiration of 2 years, it happened that Nimrod dreamed a dream. In his dream, he found himself with his army near the fiery furnace in the valley into which Abraham had been cast. A man resembling Abraham stepped out of the furnace, and he ran after the king with a drawn sword, the king fleeing before him in terror. While running, the pursuer threw an egg at Nimrod's head, and a mighty stream issued therefrom, wherein the king's whole host was drowned. The king alone survived with 3 men. When Nimrod examined his companions, he observed that they wore royal attire, and in form and stature they resembled himself. The stream changed back into an egg again, and a little chick broke forth from it and flew up and settled on the head of the king and put out one of his eyes. The king was confounded in his sleep, and when he awoke, his heart beat like a trip hammer, and his fear was exceedingly great. In the morning, when he arose, he sent and called for his wise men and magicians, and they told him his dream. One of his wise men, Anoko by name, stood up and said, "Know, O king, this dream points out the misfortune which Abraham and his descendants will bring upon thee. A time will come when he and his followers will make war upon thy army, and they will annihilate it. Thou and the 3 kings, thy allies, will be the only ones to escape death, but later thou will lose thy life at the hands of one of the descendants of Abraham. Consider, O king, that thy wise men read this fate of thine in the stars. 52 years ago, at the birth of Abraham, as long as Abraham liveth upon the ground, thou shalt not be established, nor thy kingdom." Nimrod took Anoko's words to heart and dispatched some of his servants to seize Abraham and kill him. It happened that Eleazar, the slave whom Abraham had received as a present from Nimrod, was at that time at the royal court. With great haste, he sped to Abraham to induce him to flee before the king's bailiffs. His master accepted his advice and took refuge in the house of Noah and Shem, where he lay hiding a whole month. The king's officers reported that despite zealous efforts, Abraham was nowhere to be found. Thenceforth, the king did not concern himself about Abraham. When Terah visited his son in his hiding place, Abraham proposed that they leave the land and take up their abode in Canaan in order to escape the pursuit of Nimrod. He said, "Consider that it was not for thy sake that Nimrod overloaded thee with honors, but for his own profit. Though he continued to confer the greatest of benefactions upon thee, what are they but earthly vanity? For riches and possessions profit not in the day of wrath and fury. Hearken unto my voice, O Father. Let us depart for the land of Canaan and serve the God that hath created thee, that it may be well with thee." Noah and Shem aided and abetted the efforts of Abraham to persuade Terah, whereupon Terah consented to leave his country, and he and Abraham and Lot, the son of Haran, departed from Haran with their household. They found the land pleasant, and also the inhabitants thereof, who readily yielded to the influence of Abraham's humane spirit and his piety. Many of them obeyed his precepts and became God-fearing and good. Terah's resolve to quit his native land for the sake of Abraham and take up his abode into the strange parts, and his impulse to do it before the divine call visited Abraham himself. This Yahuwah accounted a great merit unto Terah, and he was permitted to see his son Abraham rule as king over the whole world. For when the miracle happened and Isaac was born unto his aged parents, the whole world repaired to Abraham and Sarah and demanded to know what they had done that so great a thing should be accomplished for them. Abraham told them all that had happened between Nimrod and himself, and how he had been ready to be burnt for the glory of Yahuwah, and how Yahuwah had rescued him from the flames. In token of their admiration for Abraham and his teachings, they appointed him to be their king, and in commemoration of Isaac's wondrous birth, the money coined by Abraham bore the fingers of an aged husband and wife on the obverse side, and of a young man and his wife on the reverse side. For Abraham and Sarah both were rejuvenated at the birth of Isaac. Abraham's white hair turned black, and the lines in Sarah's face were smoothed out. For many years, Terah continued to live a witness to his son's glory, for his death did not occur until Isaac was a youth of 35. A youth of 35. I'm just past that by about 6 years. A youth of 35. And a still greater reward waited upon his good deed. Yahuwah accepted his repentance, and when he departed this life, he entered into paradise and not into hell, though he had passed the larger number of his days in sin. Indeed, it had been his fault that Abraham came near to losing his life at the hands of Nimrod. All right, we're going to the next section. A star in the east. Terah had been a high official in the court of Nimrod, and he was held in great consideration by the king and his suite. A son was born unto him, whom he called Abram, because the king had raised him to an exalted place. In the night of Abraham's birth, the astrologers and the wise men of Nimrod came to the house of Terah and ate and drank and rejoiced with him that night. When they left the house, they lifted up their eyes toward heaven to look at the stars, and they saw, and behold, one great star came from the east and ran athwart the heavens and swallowed up the 4 stars at the 4 corners. They were all astonished at the sight, but they understood this matter and knew its importance. They said to one another, "This only betokens that the child that hath been born unto Terah this night will grow up and be fruitful, and he will multiply and possess all the earth, he and his children forever. And he and his seed will slay great kings and inherit their lands." They went home that night, and in the morning they rose up early and assembled their meeting house. They spake to one another and said, "Lo, the sight that we saw last night is hidden from the king. It has not been made known to him. And should this thing become known to him in the latter days, he will say to us, Why did you conceal this matter from me? And then we all shall suffer death. Now let us go and tell the king the sight which we saw and the interpretation thereof, and we shall be clear from this thing." And they went to the king and told him the sight that they had seen and their interpretation thereof. And they added the advice that he pay the value of the child to Terah and slay the babe. Accordingly, the king sent for Terah, and when he came, he spake to him. "It hath been told unto me that a son was born thee yesternight, and a wondrous sign was observed in the heavens at his birth. Now give me the boy, that we may slay him before evil comes upon us from him, and I will give thee and thy house full of silver and gold in exchange for him." Remember, if y'all read Jasher, this story is also in the book of Jasher. This just gives a little bit more detail than what Jasher does. Terah answered, "This thing which thou hast promised unto me is like the words which a man spoke to a mule, saying, I will give thee a great heap of barley, a house full thereof, on the condition that I cut off thy head." The mule replied, "Of what use will the barley be to me if thou cuttest off my head? Who will eat it when thou givest to me? Thus also do I say, what shall I do with silver and gold after the death of my son? Who shall inherit me?" But when Terah saw how the king's anger burned within him at these words, he added, "Whatever the king desireth to do unto his servant, that let him do. Even my son is at the king's disposal, without value or exchange, and he and his two older brothers." The king spake, however, saying, I will purchase thy youngest son for a price. And Terah made answer, Let my king give me 3 days' time to consider the matter and consult about it with my family. The king agreed to this condition, and on the third day he sent to Terah, saying, Give me thy son for a price, as I spake unto thee. And if thou wilt not do this, I will send and slay all thy hast in thy house, and there shall not be a dog left unto thee. It really didn't look like Terah had a choice, did he? Then Terah took a child from which his handmaid had born to him unto that day, and he brought the babe to the king and received value for him. And the king took the child and dashed his head against the ground, for he thought it was Abraham. But Terah took his son Abraham together with the child's mother and his nurse and concealed them in a cave, and thither he carried their provisions to them once a month. And Yahuwah was with Abraham in the cave, and he grew up. But the king and all his servants thought that Abraham was dead. And when Abraham was 10 years old, he and his mother and his nurse went out from the cave, for the king and his servants had forgotten the affair of Abraham. And in that time, all the inhabitants of the earth, with the exception of Noah and his household, transgressed against Yahuwah, and they made unto themselves every man his god, gods of wood and stone, which could neither speak, nor hear, nor deliver from distress. The king and all his servants, and Terah with his household, were the first two to worship images of wood and stone. Terah made 12 gods of large size, of wood and of stone, corresponding to the 12 months of the year, and he paid homage to them monthly in turn. Next section, y'all, entitled The True Believer. We're moving along pretty fast today. I guess because I'm not adding in a bunch of stuff, my stories and stuff. I'm just trying to get through it because the kids, when they wake up, time is going to be up. Okay, The True Believer. Once Abraham went into the temple of the idols in his father's house to bring sacrifices to them, and he found one of them, Merrimath by name, hewn out of stone, lying prostrate on his face before the iron god of Nahor. The idol was too heavy for him to raise it alone, and he called his father to help him put Merrimuth back in his place. While they were handling the image, its head dropped off, and Terah took a stone and chiseled another Merrimuth, setting the head of the first upon the new body. Then Terah continued and made 5 more gods, and all these he delivered to Abraham and bade him sell them in the streets of the city. Abraham was the wrong one, sent him to sell these. Abraham ain't about to get no money for these. Abraham saddled his mule and went to the inn where the merchants from Vandana in Syria put up on their way to Egypt. He hoped to dispose of his wares there. When he reached the inn, one of the camels belonging to the merchants belched, and the sound frightened his mule so that it ran off pell-mell and broke 3 of the idols. The merchants not only bought the 2 sound idols from him, they also gave him the price of the broken ones, for Abraham had told them how distressed he was to appear before his father with less money than he expected to receive for his handiwork. This incident made Abraham reflect upon the worthlessness of idols, and he said to himself, "What are these evil things done by my father? Is not he the God of his gods? For they do not come into being by reason of his carving and chiseling and contriving. Were it not more seemly that they should pay worship to him than he to them, seeing they are the work of his hands?" Meditating thus, he reached his father's house and entered and handed his father the money for the 5 images. And Terah rejoiced and said, "Blessed art thou unto my gods, because thou didst bring me the price of the idols, and my labor was not in vain." But Abraham made a reply, "Hear, my father Terah, blessed are thy gods through thee, for thou art their God, since thou dost fashion them, and their blessing is destruction, and their help is vanity. They that help not themselves, how can they help thee or bless me?" Terah grew very wrathful at Abraham that he uttered such speech against his gods. And Abraham, thinking upon his father's anger, left him and went from the house. But Terah called him back and said, "Gather together the chips of the oak from which I made the images before thou didst return, and prepare my dinner for me." Abraham, ready to do his father's bidding, and as he took up the chips, he found a little god among them whose forehead bore the inscription, God Beresat. He threw the chips upon the fire and set Beresat next to it, saying, Attention, take care, Beresat, that the fire go not out until I come back. If it burns low, blow into it and make it flame up again. Speaking thus, he went out and came in again and found Beresat laying prone on his back, badly burnt. Smiling, he said to himself, In truth, Beresat, thou canst keep the fire alive and prepare food. And while he spoke, the idol was consumed to ashes. Then he took the dishes to his father, and he ate and drank and was glad and blessed his God Marumath. But Abraham said to his father, Bless not thy God Marumath, but rather thy God Beresat, for it was he who, out of his great love for thee, threw himself into the fire that thy meal might be cooked. Where is he now? Exclaimed Sarah. And Abraham answered, He has become ashes in the fierceness of the fire. Sarah said, Great is the power of Beresat. I will make another this day, and tomorrow he will prepare my food for me. These words of his father made Abraham laugh in his mind, but his soul was grieved at his obduracy. Obduracy. Yes, I think that's what that is. Obduracy. Or probably at his foolishness. Obduracy. And he proceeded to make clear his views upon the idol, saying, Father, no matter which of the two idols thou bless, their behavior is senseless, for the images that stand in the holy temple are more to be worshipped than thine. Zacchaeus, the god of my brother Nahor, is more venerable than Merrimath, because he is made cunningly of gold, where when he grows old, he will be worked over again. But when Merrimath becomes dumb or is shivered in pieces, he will not be renewed, for he is of stone. And of the god Joab, who stands above the other gods with Zacchaeus, is more venerable than Beresat, made of wood, because he is hammered out of silver and ornamented by men to show his magnificence. But thy Beresat, before thou didst fashion him into a god with thy axe, and was rooted in the earth, standing there great and wonderful, with the glory of branches and blossoms. Now he is dry and gone in his sap, and gone is his sap. From his height he is fallen to the earth. From grandeur he came to pettiness, and the appearance of his face has paled away, and he himself was burnt in the fire, and he was consumed unto ashes, and he is no more. And thou didst say then, I will make me another this day, and tomorrow he will prepare my food for me. Father, Abraham continued and said, the fire is more to be worshipped than thy gods of gold and silver and wood and stone, because it consumes them. But also the fire I call not God, because it is subject to water, which quenches it. But also the water I call not God, because it is sucked up by the earth. And I call the earth more venerable, because it conquers the water. But also the earth I call not God, because it is dried out by the sun. And I call the sun more venerable than the earth, because he illuminates the whole world with his rays. But also the sun I call not God, because his light is obscured when darkness cometh up. Nor do I call the moon and the stars gods, because their light too is extinguished when their time to shine is past. How wise was he? Just pointing out all the obvious that we don't even think about, right? You know what? This reminded me, Alicia, since you hear this, reminded me of something, right? This is I would say this is okay, so there are groups of people, although we are the children of Yah, and some people call them gods. Me and my sister was having this conversation because somebody had brought it up to her. It's like, we gods. Okay, I get the logic in what you're saying, but if you are God, I know we're made in the image of God. How did you plan the day of your birth? I mean, do you, unless you commit suicide, do you plan the day of your death? Or why are you living in abject poverty? I mean, why can't you uh go here, go there at the very thought. How are you God? Can you make yourself fly? Like all those things that we just sit and think with some of the things and conversations. So I would say some of the needless, I'm not even gonna say needless conversations. I think because some of those conversations are actually needed because I don't think people think about these things. Just like Abraham is pointing out to his father, how can this be God? The earth is not God and the sun is not God because the earth is dried out by the sun. The sun is obscured by the clouds, and when darkness comes, none of these can be God. There must be a God that created them all, just like us. You know, there has to be someone other than us. We ourselves are not God. Until we're actually transformed, we die as men every day. And nobody can change that until we are changed into the complete full likeness of him where we die no more. But as long as we're in flesh, we are not gods. We submit to the God. Just in case anybody ever had that thought. We are the sons. We're the sons of the dirt. We're the sons of Adam, of men. We're sons of the flesh. Sons of God are angels and they do not die. They don't die, right? Okay, just want to make sure everybody was clear on that. Let's go back up a sentence. But also the sun I call not God, because his light is obscured when darkness cometh up. Nor do I call the moon and the stars gods, because their light too is extinguished when their time to shine is past. But hearken unto this, my father Terah, which I will declare unto thee. The God who hath created all things, he is the true God. He hath empurpled the heavens and gilded the sun and given radiance to the moon and also the stars. And he drieth out the earth in the midst of many waters. And also thee hath he put upon the earth, and me hath he sought out in the confusion of my thoughts. Let's go on with this conversation. The next section, the iconoclast. But Terah could not be convinced, and then replied to Abraham's question, who the God was that had created heaven and earth and the children of men. He took himself to the hall wherein stood 12 great idols and a large number of little idols, and pointing out to them, he said, oh, hold on, before I say this also, Enoch talks about a place that is preserved. Shalom, shalom, mother. The Book of Enoch, we read it already. I'm going to have to go back to it. But the Book of Enoch, it talks about a place that's specifically reserved for those like men like Nimrod, who themselves claim to be gods upon this earth. Like you're God, there's a place for you where gods can go and prove that they are indeed gods. But if you know, like I know, this is designed for you to fail because you indeed are not a God. That's going to be torture for those who carried themselves like they were true gods, and those who walk with maybe legal power and illegal power while they were here to make themselves seem like they were gods because they have a little inside information and they can manipulate the elements. We're allowed to manipulate the elements in a way as Yahuwah leads us, but not to fool men like you're a god. But there's a place that they specifically go to prove indeed if you are truly a god or not. And you're going to find out real quick, probably before you get there, that you are not God. You are not a God. You are flesh that dies and is going to return to the dirt. Okay. But Terah could not be convinced, and then replied to Abraham's question, who the God was that created heaven and the earth and the children of men. He took himself to the hall wherein stood 12 great idols and a large number of little idols, and pointing to them, he said, here are they who have made all that thou seest on the earth. They who have created also me and thee and all the men on the earth. And he bowed down before his gods, and he left the hall with his son. Abraham went thence to his mother, and he spoke to her, saying, behold, my father has shown those unto me who has made heaven and earth and all the sons of men. Now therefore hasten and fetch a kid from the flock, and make of it savory meat, that I may bring it to my father's gods. Perhaps I may thereby become acceptable to them. His mother did according to his request, but when Abraham brought the offering to the gods, he saw that they had no voice, no hearing, no motion, and not one of them stretched forth his hand to eat. Abraham mocked them and said, "Surely the savory meat that I prepared does not please you, or perhaps it is too little for you. Therefore, I will prepare fresh savory meat tomorrow, better and more plentiful than this, that I may see what cometh from you." But the gods remained mute and without motion before the second offering of excellent savory meat, as before the first offering. And the spirit of Yahuwah came over Abraham, and he cried out and said, "Woe unto my father and his wicked generation, whose hearts are all inclined to vanity, who serve these idols of wood and stone, which cannot eat, nor smell, nor hear, nor speak, which have mouths without speech, eyes without sight, ears without hearing, hands without feeling, and legs without motion." Then Abraham took a hatchet in his hand and broke all his father's gods. And when he had done breaking them, he placed the hatchet in the hand of the biggest god among them all, and he went out. Terah, having heard the crash of the hatchet of the stone, ran into the room of idols, and he reached it at the moment when Abraham was leaving it. And he saw what had happened and hastened after Abraham and said to him, "What is this mischief that thou hast done unto my gods?" Abraham answered, "I set savory meat before them, and when I came nigh unto them that they might eat, they all stretched out their hands to take of the meat before the big one had put forth his hand to eat. This one, enraged against them on account of their behavior, took the hatchet and broke all of them, and behold, the hatchet is yet in his hands, as thou mayest see." Then Terah turned in wrath upon Abraham, and he said, "Thou speakest lies unto me. Is there spirit, soul, or power in these gods to do all that thou hast told me? Are they not wood and stone?" Like, so you know, you know. Listen, are they not wood and stone? And have I not myself made them? Is it thou that did it is thou that did place the hatchet in the hand of the big God, and thou sayest he smote them all. Abraham answered his father and said, "How then can thou serve these idols in whom there is no power to do anything? Can these idols in which thou trustest deliver thee? Can they hear thy prayers when thou callest upon them?" After having spoken these and similar words, admonishing his father to mend his ways and refrain from worshiping idols, he leapt up before Terah and took the hatchet from the big idol and broke it therewith and ran away. Terah hastened to Nimrod, bowed down before him, and besought him to hear his story. Now you're going back to the wrong one. Listen to this. Terah hastened to Nimrod, bowed down before him, and besought him to hear his story about his son who had been born to him 50 years back, and how he had done to his gods, and how he had spoken. "Now therefore, my lord and king," he said, "send for him, that he may come before thee, and do thou judge him according to the law, that we may be delivered from this evil." When Abraham was brought before the king being Nimrod, he told him the same story he had told Terah about the big God who broke the smaller ones. But the king replied, "Idols do neither speak, nor eat, nor move." Then Abraham reproached him for worshiping gods that can do nothing, and admonished him to serve the God of the universe. His last words were, "If thy wicked heart will not hearken to my words, to cause thee to forsake thy evil ways and serve the eternal God, then will thou die in shame in thy latter days, thou, thy people, and all connected with thee, who hear thy words and walk in thy evil ways." The king ordered Abraham to be put in prison, and at the end of 10 days, he caused all the princes and great men of the realm to appear before him, and to them he put the case of Abraham. Their verdict was that he should be burnt. And accordingly, the king had a fire prepared for 3 days and 3 nights in his furnace at Kasdim, and Abraham was to be carried thither from prison to be burnt. All the inhabitants of the land, about 900,000 men, and the women and children besides, came to see what would be done to Abraham. And when he was brought forth, The astrologers recognized him, and they said to the king, "Surely this is the man whom we knew as a child, at whose birth the great star swallowed the four stars. Behold, his father did transgress thy command, and he made a mockery of thee, for he did bring thee another child, and him didst thou kill." Remember, Terah took took one of his maid servants' children who had just been born and said, "This is my son Abraham." And Abraham got to live. Shalom, shalom. Terah was greatly terrified, for he was afraid of the king's wrath, and he admitted that he had deceived the king. And when the king said, "Tell me who advised thee to do this, hide not, and thou shalt not die," he falsely accused Haran, who had been 32 years old at the time of Abraham's birth, of having advised him to deceive the king. At the command of the king, Abraham and Haran, stripped of all their clothes except their hosen, and their hands and feet bound with linen cords, were cast into the furnace. Haran, because his heart was not perfect with Yahuwah, perished in the fire, and also the men who cast him into the furnace were burnt with the flames which leapt out over them, and Abraham alone was saved by Yahuwah, and he was not burnt, though the cords which he were bound with were consumed. So if you were here yesterday, we read the deeper details about this particular thing right here. And because remember, I brought it out. I said Haran's heart was not pure before Yah, that he was burnt up in the fire. He was like, okay, if Yah saves Abraham, that's who I'm going to serve. But if he doesn't and he died, then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to serve Nimrod. That's the deeper story to this part right here. It's kind of backtracking a little bit. All right. Okay. I'll read that last sentence again. Haran, because his heart was not perfect with Yahuwah, perished in the fire, and also the men who cast him into the furnace were burnt by the flames which leapt out over them. And Abraham alone was saved by Yahuwah, and he was not burnt, though the cords with which he was bound were consumed. For 3 days and 3 nights Abraham walked in the midst of the fire, and all the servants of the king came and told him, "Behold, we have seen Abraham walking about in the midst of the fire." Don't this sound familiar? So this is not the first time that the fiery furnace happened. They were known to just burn people up. You tick off the king, yep, get that fire going. We got somebody else we want to feed to it. At first, the king would not believe them, but when some of his faithful princes corroborated the words of his servants, he rose up and went to see it for himself. Then he commanded his servants to take Abraham from the fire, but they could not, because the flames leapt toward them from the furnace. And when they tried again, at the king's command, to approach the furnace, the flames shot out and burnt their faces, so that 8 of their number died. The king then called unto Abraham and said, "O servant of the God who is in heaven, go forth from the midst of the fire and come hither and stand before me." And Abraham came and stood before the king. And the king spoke to Abraham and said, "How cometh it that thou was not burnt in the fire?" And Abraham made answer, "The God of heaven and earth, in whom I trust, and who hath all things in his power, he did deliver me from the fire into which thou did cast me." And that, my beautiful people, is where we are going to stop today. So I really love reading this. All the parts that we are missing from the canonized Bible, it really will build your faith more and more. I like to say they removed all the, I ain't gonna say they removed all the good stuff, but there are more things that happen than what we have been reading as we've been growing up. That has been made, it's common knowledge to everybody else except for us here in America. That's why I was like, okay, instead of me just giving y'all the references, some of these I'm gonna have to start reading, because I know life gets busy and things happen, time goes on, and most people never actually open up to read it. But if they can just pop this in their ear in the morning and listen to me read it while you go about your day, you're driving to work or you're getting ready for work or whatever, you might even be home. At least if you hear it once, you're like, wait, what? And I also leave the reference. Maybe it'll stick with you long enough to where you can start going to search into it yourself and see some of the things that happen and how their faith is just like, when Yah does something for us, it literally does something to our face. Like there is no turning back. I know that there's a God who lives. All the things that I've experienced, There's nobody turning me away from this path of righteousness. We're going right here in this direction. And it builds your faith. And the more you see it and see how it happened in other people's lives, it gives us the strength and the courage to pray and ask for things that we may not originally have known that Yahuwah has done. And some of these things seem like far out there because we hadn't heard about it. We have faith to ask y'all for things that we clearly know he has done multiple times before for many people. So that's why I'm like, y'all gotta go read it. It's gonna strengthen your faith and it's gonna expand your mind. It's like, what? We can do that? We can ask y'all for that, and then we start testing it. I'm like a little kid in a science lab, a scientist, whatever. I'm gonna test everything. I want to make sure I'm following all the rules. I ain't getting into nothing I ain't supposed to be doing. I'm like, Father, but if you say we can do this, I'm gonna take you at your word. I'm not really sure, but if I'm wrong, please help me because I want to get off. But if I can test this and you can prove that this is true, we want to keep going, and it builds your faith to begin asking and believing y'all for bigger things to where people are shaky just to ask for gas money for the next day. It's like my faith is so past that right now, but it's a process. It's a daily thing of growing, and you can't grow if you don't hear truth, and you just can't grow if you don't hear truth. So with that being said, beautiful people, we are done. So let's go ahead because another child has woken up before they start getting loud. So let's go ahead and do the blessing. But anyway, it is Sunday, December 27th, 2020, day 35 of year 3 of reading through the books of the law and the prophets. And of the 3-year consecutive day count, day 704. 704. Remember, that is not counting the Sabbath days and the feast Sabbath days where we are required to rest. 6 days we have to work. The one day Yahuwah say, stop and rest so I can rejuvenate you and bless you. We don't want to wear these bodies out, let's just follow directions, So let's go ahead and hop on over here to the blessing. And we read Enoch 81 through 83 and Legends of the Jews, page 65 to, I need to write down the last page where we stopped at. I'm sorry. 65 to 69. 65 to 69. And I always put the references in the description box, y'all. So if y'all want to go back and read it later, pull it up yourself. All right, y'all. So the blessing, remember, it is found in Numbers chapter 6, verses 22 through 27. Remember, the Nazarite vow is the first 21 verses. Guys, and as we read more of this in some of the accounts, you will see how the reason why Yahuwah says do some of these prayers and do some of the things that he says do. But a lot of time we don't get that full knowledge if we don't have those missing pieces. So that's why I like to add these things in for everybody. So, all right. And Yahuwah spake unto Moses, saying, speak unto Aaron and unto his sons, saying, on this wise ye shall bless the children of Israel, saying unto them, may Yahuwah bless us and keep us. May Yahuwah make his face to shine upon us and be gracious unto us. May Yahuwah lift up his countenance upon us and give us his peace. And they shall put my name, whose name? Yahuwah's name, and they shall put my name upon the children of Israel, and I will bless them. All right, beautiful people. I love y'all. I don't see any questions here today. So we're going to go ahead and roll out. Thank you all for standing with me while I stood my post today, reading the words of Yah. And if y'all didn't know me, my mom was talking about it yesterday. Do you realize this is what they did? Ezra, the priests and stuff, they stood and they read the words of Yahuwah's instructions to the people so that they could hear it. You have, like I said, you have to hear it in order to know what's there so you can do it. And when they started doing this again, after they had come out of captivity and during the time of Nehemiah, it had been so long since they had heard the words of instruction that Yah had given to the priests and the leaders to read to the people that they began to weep. They were so sad and they were so repentant that they realized that they had not been keeping what Yahuwah had said, which is why they were in captivity and things were not working out. So they said we got to stop this now. And they even the wives that they had taken, the people that you would say, do not join yourself with these people. And some of them had already had families with them. They say, you know what, we gotta cut all this short. We've done this. Yahuwah told us not to do it. He said, you know what, we even got to put our wives and our children away. I'm like, ooh, that's kind of tough, because think about it now. How many people would be willing to do that? How many people would be willing to do that? But I'm just saying that's how much it is like, we got to do this. We can no longer live this way. Yahuwah told us not to do this. We need to correct our lives right now. So there was a process that they did, and there was a period of weeks where they all came before the priest by section and stuff, as they began to repent and do all this stuff and just align themselves with the scriptures. So I said all that to say it's good to hear the words of the Most High going inside of us daily. Even if you don't read it out loud, if your life is so busy where you can't just sit and read, there are apps. The Bible app. I always let the Bible app play in my ear, because my days are busy a lot of times. Once I get off here, it's like we flying all day long doing just life. But Yah is faithful even in technology. If we're so busy, if we're driving to work, pop it in your ear, listen to it on your break, pop it in your ear. If you're able to do your work and have an earbud in and not be distracted or whatever and still get your work done, let it play. Put it in your ear when you're laying in the bed about to go to sleep. You got to get it into you somehow. I'm just saying, start somewhere, people. Start somewhere. All right, but I'm done running my mouth for the day. I love y'all, and I see y'all bright and early in the morning, 7:15. Remember, during the week, 7:15 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Saturday and Sunday, if the days don't fall on the Sabbath where we rest, is 7:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. All right, people, that's it. I'm done. We out here. Bruce.